Aha! Today is another day. Happened again. Cheers. Good morning. I've been telling these little stories. So today I have a little story that's about telling stories. That's like the recursive enigma of a man sitting under a tree reading a book, and he's having a dream of himself sitting under a tree reading a book, which if you tried to illustrate would never end. If you tried to illustrate a man under a tree reading a book who's dreaming of himself under a tree reading a book, where would it ever end? So I was a professor for like 20 years. And there's a whole story how that happened, and we're not going to get into that. But one of the major courses that I gave in research development, which would be for a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, was in narrative development. How do you build a story? And what do you build a story on, and why? And how do you develop characters? I had a wonderful writer collaborate with me on a project in the 1990s who had gone to Yale School of Drama. And when we worked together for about a year, she explained to me the essential process that they teach at Yale on how to develop a story. And that was the basis of which I built my curriculum. But you can't leave it at that, because if you really want to create, in my idea of creation, it isn't the point of doing something that is, quote, I have to do the classic, quote, successful. I'm not sure what that even means. My idea is that you have to create something that is coming from your soul or your mind. If you don't believe in soul, which I'm not sure how I feel about that, but certainly I believe in the mind. It can be argued what the mind is, but I really do believe in bringing out an idea from your mind and trying to get it out there as best you can. That may fly in the face of successful. But again, that word successful is subject to debate. That being said, what I would have these students who they wanted to create like superheroes and violent fights of evil and confrontations in light and darkness and drug-infested bacchanals of sexually wild abandon. And I said, why don't some of you try to build a story on things that have happened to you, on things that you know, things that are true, and see how you feel about it. I said, you could do a movie about a woman seated at a table with the sun coming in the window and a coffee cup and the steam coming up off the coffee and the light, and then her picking up the cup of coffee and taking a sip, and that would be an amazing movie. But that may not be enough to feed your needs. But what I suggest is that you tell a story that's very real, that happened to you, or something that you think about, or something you really care about, and see what happens. So I said, you know what? I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me. And I told him a story. And when it was done, a student raised his hand. He said that can't be true. And I said, well, it was. I mean, I just told you a story. He said, I don't believe that. That couldn't have happened. I said, okay. Whether it did or not, let me ask you a question. Did you enjoy it? He said, yeah, it was great. I said, oh, okay. Was it entertaining? He said, God, I want to know what happens next. I said, so then it was a good story. He said, yeah. I said, so then I'm your professor, right? So regardless of whether it was true or not, I told you a story that really worked. That's why we're here. We're in this class to learn how to do that, and I know how to do that, and so now you can have confidence in me as your professor. So can we move on? And he sat there, and the students were like, whoa. So I wanted to turn on the overhead projector. They have these like really fancy overhead projectors, like thousands of dollars, with the RGB, the red, green, blue light, and it would focus on the wall, and you'd get these huge projections. So I used the remote and I pressed it and it didn't turn on. I'm like, oh man. I tried again, it didn't turn on. So one of the students said, well, you have all these special powers. Why don't you use your special powers? And I said, okay. And I stood up and I walked over to the middle of the room and I got underneath the overhead projector and I went, and the projector turned on. And the students were like, what? Like that. Then the student who had told me to use my powers, he looked at his cell phone, which was sitting on the top of his desk. And it hadn't done anything. He just looked at it. And I said, why are you looking at your cell phone? And he said, I said, yeah, I know why I said, this is a class and we got a lot of stuff going on. Why don't you forget your cell phone for a while? I don't want you to look at your cell phone again. And he said, okay. And then he looked at it and I pointed. When I pointed at the cell phone rang. And the class was like, oh shit. And I didn't give a tell of like how shocked I was. What I did is I said, can we go on now with the class? And so I finished that lecture, and this whole myth started about me that went around the department like wildfire. And I never said another word about it again. That's the story.